men have unleashed the unthinkable, and hell is upon the earth. In the post-apocalyptic world we now live in, it is not what it used to be. Today there's so much pain, heartache, and suffering. Let me tell you a story. It all began in the future, in the year 2041. There's this one man who is now called the Renegade. He is sitting back, thinking about all the signs that led up to this, taking events that has already happened, and reading about past posts that was dropped on a little unknown Facebook page. That page was instrumental in who he had become. He wishes he could have made many decisions that could have altered the timeline, and it could have saved many innocent lives that were lost so long ago. If only the world would have listened, our future might not have turned out like this. So say a prayer that we correct the timeline before it is too late. Greetings, Patriots. Renegade here, or as I signed the Facebook post, I asked for feedback on what you would want me to talk about. Well, I was asked to do a video on Black Lives Matter. I'm sure most of you that watch news or watches me have seen what's going on. Now, my next video will be on the federal officers arresting protesters and placing them in unmarked vans, whisking off them to an unknown location. I think this video needs to be put out first in order to understand the next upcoming video. I also need to say this before I start with the topic and my thoughts on Black Lives Matter. I really need your help in so many ways. Remember, we are located on every major social media platform. We need for you to share our posts and videos. Remember, we have Renegade Wears t-shirts that you can message our Facebook page direct or go on over to our sponsor at uncensoredtshirts.com. We also have a PayPal set up that you may donate through to help us out. Don't forget that we have a Discord room that you may join and chat with us as well. Remember, I do this for you, the Patriots out there. I do not do this to look cool. I do not do this for the fame. Nor do I do this for the money. I do what I do because I care. I care about what direction our country is heading. I will place all the links in the description below. Let's get to why I am here right now. Many people think Black Lives Matter is a slogan, an ideal, or a grassroots movement. Black Lives Matter is a Marxist scam, as with all totalitarian ploys. Black Lives Matter uses your natural fear of social rejection to force conformity and compliance with its goals. If we buy into it, we have a lot to lose, including all individual liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and especially the right to a private life and private relationships. The Black Lives Matter goal should be obvious by now. Conjure up enough blind conformity to create the illusion of unanimous support. Now, support for what? The uncontroversial slogan that Black Lives Matter is just a tool to draw you emotionally into its broader and more destructive agenda. Now, if you was to go over and read the Black Lives Matter website, you'll find lots of Marxist agendas like ending constitutional self-government under the guise of sustainable transformation, and taking over law enforcement to abolish the rule of law, defund the police. It's anti-Christian and anti-free market. It's committed to disrupting the nuclear family and replacing it with collective forms of child rendering. Its endgame is typical of Marxism, a power grab stoked by the illusion of mass approval through street theater. When we get sucked into the vortex of Black Lives Matter mass delusion, whether out of a sense of guilt or ignorance. The results are predictable. Forced confession, the suppression of speech, stoking of resentment, accusations of thought crime, toppling historical monuments, civilizational breakdown, meddling in private life, especially family. So what's the secret of creating enough woke conformity to get such an anti-thought point? How does a well-organized band of power-craving elites get people to surrender the right to speak their own minds? To open up the door to giving collective elites to raw power they crave. I use the term socialism and Marxism somewhat interchangeably. Marxism tend to refer to themselves as socialists, even if some socialists claim they aren't Marxists. All are collected through with the same pattern and tendencies and agendas, some harder than others, depending on their state of evolution. Weaponizing the fear of loneliness. The threat of ostracism is primal and universal human terror, and thus an extremely powerful weapon, especially when mobs enforce it. Tyrants have always been in the business of cultivating the terror of social rejection in order to control people and amass power. Sadly, most people are not consciously aware of these dynamics and are therefore vulnerable to succumbing. The terror of abandonment is built into our social DNA because human beings cannot survive in isolation. What we see today is a psychological operation that plays on that fear through identity politics, peer modeling, and social cognition. First, the propaganda media conjures up images of unanimity with a false Black Lives Matter narrative. Anyone who doesn't buy in it is smeared as racist at the great risk of losing his or her job, status, livelihood, and now even family. It is designed to introduce everyone to cave into that primal fear of social isolation and submit to the power of elite. Once society reaches a tipping point where everyone blindly succumbs, then the power grab begins and game over. Emotional blackmail is common to identity politics. Emotional blackmail seems to be an inert tactic of Marxist activities as well as today's cult of wokeness. We can now see how Black Lives Matter applies that tool to the daily lives of its allies. The author of a recent New York Times op-ed writes that he fears for his life when he goes out because he's black. He's irritated with texts of sympathy he receives from white allies because he finds their support for Black Lives Matter inadequate. The essay, titled "I Don't Need Love from Text from My White Friends," offers a prescription for proving their love, threatening to ostracize any loved ones who don't get with the program. Now, these are his exact words. Quote, "To your relatives and loved ones, telling them you will not be visiting them or answering phone calls until they take a significant action in supporting Black Lives Matter, either through protest or financial contribution." Now, repeat after me and repeat after me. Cult experts have a term for this practice of meddling in relationships. It's called predatory alienation. It's a form of rational aggression straight out of Cult 101. Black Lives Matter offers us other examples of mass compliance, reminiscent of Jonestown, a creepy Merrick-style struggle version, recently took place in a affluent suburb of Bethesda, Maryland, where a large crowd dramatically recited a mass confession of collective white guilt. They also promised to educate others, leading likely to performing emotional blackmail when deemed necessary. We've also seen spectacles of police officers and even military personnel taking the knee in obedience to mobs. Corporate America, from Amazon to Zoom, has drank the Kool-Aid in fear. Even supposed Republicans like Mitt Romney and George W. Bush publicly support Black Lives Matter false claim that America is systematically racist nation. Maybe you now have family and friends who hire you, threatening overtly or tactically to shun you if you don't get with the program. Americans should have enough sense to know that such shameful acts of submission to mobs are not about race, police brutality, or even killing. They're about shifting power from rule of law to a socialist elite who intend lawless domination over everyone once in power. Their false narratives exploit George Floyd's death as a trigger to stir up fear and loathing in the name of love in order to gain and consolidate power. Socialism weaponizes loneliness to control people. Emotional manipulation we're seeing by Black Lives Matter reflects socialism's long pattern of isolating individuals and controlling their relationships. We can see it in socialism history, in its politics, and especially in its tactics. Abolishing the family and religion are both old socialist rally cries. A big part of socialism history is its war on primary institutions through which our most intimate relationships and our unique identities are formed. We become isolated and weakened, and even more controlled when separated from them. You know, that's the idea. Socialist dictators like Lenin, Stalin, Siddhartha, Pot, and Hitler were dedicated to the destruction of all private life, insisting that loyalty belongs only to them. That's why the death toll of socialist systems is more than 100 million. Whatever else socialists say they promote, they say they promote equality, justice, free stuff, but they have one goal. That's placing too much power in the hands of too few people. To undermine the power of individuals, they undermine their private relationships. That's exactly what just about every socialist policy has done, including no-fault divorce, welfare dependency, and abortion, which wreaks havoc on the family. The victims of this brokenness naturally feel alienated, yet they still have a need to belong to something. Socialists feed that appetite with pseudo-communists such as contrived collective mobs, and yet it's a wokeness cult. Groupthink and imposed isolation are a vicious cycle. The mob mindset is a trap, a form of mental solitary confinement, and a chronic form of mind rape. Why? Because mobs of wokeness do not allow for anyone to express an original thought to another human being without the risk of being smeared and isolated. As people invest in groupthink to remain in the herd, they end up spiraling even deeper into that mental isolation, cutting off normal conversation. It soon becomes triggered by other points of view. Black Lives Matter activists have not only taken full advantage of the fear of loneliness already in our culture, they also seem intent in perpetrating the fear by stoking more divisions within private relationships. Political correctness and identity politics have long been used as a tool of agitation designed to instill groupthink and stir up that threat of loneliness. Political correctness works by introducing self-censorship, cutting off conversations, and exchange of ideas which might lead to friendship. People with politically incorrect ideas often confide that they feel completely alone. Identity politics works by forcing people to focus only on a collective identity and collective guilt while erasing each of us as unique individuals. Both are alienating. Both empower black actors. Most of us have never had a chance to learn the history of how blind conformity breeds terror and vice versa. Adjacent conformity led to the headscape of Stalin's reign of terror, of Hitler's Germany. Those who submit to false confessions of white guilt can just as easily submit to such regimes because the psychological mechanism is the same, seeking the social approval they crave and avoiding the social rejection they fear. In the end, weaponized loneliness is the fuel of socialism, as well as hardcore socialist organizations, including Black Lives Matter. Recognizing and rejecting this scam is the only way we can begin to come together as whole human beings. Like I said earlier, if you dig deeper, Black Lives Matter organization is funded with 8 figures and it's by left-wing policy agenda. Black Lives Matter Marxist political organization is dark money. White socialist billionaires and constant laundering corporations that want to hold on to that deep state action, or further, their hip or chick, and pass the cool comrade crediting media inspection. Now, George Orwell wrote in his book called 1984, Who Controls the Past, Controls the Future. Who controls the present, controls the past. Which had not been merely altered, it had been actually destroyed. Everything faded into mist. The past was erased. The assured was forgotten. The lies became truth. Today's compromised media have been harnessed and steered into scripted brainwashing. Seriously, Black Lives Matter and their cause are spreading a far more serious virus than COVID-19. It's a wicked plague that kills life, liberty, economics, peace, and social order by spreading division, hatred, and rejection for the family structure, personal responsibility, and property. All laws based on the Ten Commandments given to us by the lawgiver himself. On that note, Renegade out.